The day before my brother's rehearsal dinner, my father looked up from his newspaper, took a slow sip of coffee, and told me something that I still remember word for word. "Don't come tomorrow, Ava. We don't want to spend the evening explaining your life choices." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. I even waited for him to smile the way he sometimes did after making a dry joke. Instead, he simply folded the newspaper, placed it neatly on the kitchen counter, and looked at me with the same expression he used whenever he believed he was delivering an important lesson. "We've already talked about it," he continued. "Claire's family is successful. They're all professionals. Lawyers, executives, doctors. Ryan has worked incredibly hard to build a certain reputation, and we don't want people asking questions that make the evening uncomfortable." I stood there holding the gift I'd bought for my parents, a high-end espresso machine my mother had admired every time we walked past the appliance section at Williams-Sonoma. It suddenly felt ridiculous. "So," I asked quietly, "I'm an embarrassment now." My mother was arranging flowers in a crystal vase only a few feet away. She didn't look at me. "It's not like that," she said softly. "Then what is it like?" She carefully adjusted another flower before answering. "It's just one dinner, sweetheart. Just one dinner." The words echoed in my head, as if being excluded from my own brother's celebration was no different than changing a restaurant reservation. Before I could answer, Ryan walked into the kitchen wearing an expensive navy suit that still had the tailor's tag hanging from one sleeve. He leaned against the doorway with his usual confident smile. "Dad's right," he said. "Tomorrow's supposed to be about Claire and me. Nobody wants to spend the night explaining why my younger sister quit a perfectly good career to chase some startup dream." He said it so casually that it almost sounded rehearsed. I looked at him for several seconds before speaking. "You don't even know what I do anymore." Ryan shrugged. "Does it matter?" That question hurt more than everything else, because he genuinely didn't care. I slowly placed the wrapped espresso machine on the counter. "I guess not." Without another word, I walked out of the house. Nobody followed me. Nobody called after me. Nobody even opened the front door to see if I had left safely. The silence behind me said more than anything they could have. 3 days later, my brother walked into my headquarters wearing a tailored grey suit, a $6,000 watch, and the same confidence he'd carried his entire life. Within 10 minutes, every certainty he'd built that confidence on would disappear. But that part of the story makes more sense if I explain how everything started. 2 years earlier, I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't wealthy. I wasn't even sure I was making the right decision. At 28, I had what most people would have called a stable career. I worked as an operations manager for Blue Harbor Logistics in Columbus, Ohio. The salary was good, the benefits were excellent, and if I had stayed another few years, I probably would have moved into senior management. My parents loved that job. They loved introducing me as our daughter who works in corporate operations. Then I quit, not because I hated the work, because I couldn't stop thinking about a problem nobody seemed interested in solving. Every warehouse we worked with used outdated inventory systems that barely communicated with each other. Employees wasted hours every day correcting mistakes that software should have prevented. The more I studied it, the more convinced I became that there had to be a better solution. 2 coworkers felt exactly the same way. Ethan Cole was one of the best software architects I'd ever met. He could solve technical problems that left entire teams scratching their heads. Maya Shah managed large distribution projects and understood the industry better than almost anyone else. For nearly 18 months, the 3 of us worked a second job every evening after leaving the office. We rented a tiny workspace above an old bicycle repair shop. The building was outdated, the heating barely worked during winter, and every time it rained we had to place buckets under 2 leaks near the windows. Looking back, it was probably the least impressive office imaginable. To us, it felt like the beginning of something important. We named the company Axis Flow Technologies. At first, everything seemed exciting. We built prototypes, talked to potential customers, made presentations for investors, convinced ourselves success was only a few months away. Then reality arrived. Our first product barely worked. The software crashed during demonstrations. One investor withdrew after weeks of negotiations. Another told us we had a nice idea but no realistic business model. Within 6 months, our savings were almost gone. There were evenings when Ethan quietly admitted he was thinking about going back to his old job because he had a mortgage to pay. Maya started freelancing on weekends just to cover rent. I emptied nearly every dollar in my savings account trying to keep the company alive. Meanwhile, my family watched everything from a distance. Not once did they ask whether we needed help. Not once did they ask how the business was progressing. Every conversation sounded exactly the same. "When are you going back to a real job?" My father asked that question so often that eventually I stopped answering. Instead, I took consulting contracts redesigning warehouse operations for manufacturing companies across Ohio and Indiana. The work wasn't exciting, but it paid well enough to keep our startup alive, while Ethan rebuilt the platform almost from scratch. Those consulting projects ended up teaching us something far more valuable than any investor ever could. Every warehouse manager complained about the same problems. Every distribution center struggled with the same inefficiencies. Every client unknowingly gave us another piece of the software we were trying to build. By the time our second version launched, it wasn't based on assumptions anymore. It had been designed around hundreds of real conversations with people who would actually use it. The difference was immediate. Our first paying customer signed a 3-year contract. A month later, another company joined, then another. Word spread faster than we expected. Within a year, Axis Flow Technologies had grown from 3 exhausted founders sharing folding tables into a business, employing more than 40 people in a renovated brick office overlooking downtown Columbus. We finally had investors. We had major regional clients. We had a leadership team. And, for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about paying next month's bills. Ironically, none of that changed how my family saw me. As far as they were concerned, Ryan was still the successful child, and I was still the daughter who had thrown away a stable career for a reckless dream. The rehearsal dinner came and went without me. I didn't spend the evening wondering what my family was doing, or imagining who might have asked where I was. Instead, I stayed at the office finishing preparations for what was easily the most important meeting in our company's history. A multinational supply chain corporation called Westbridge Capital Logistics had spent almost 4 months evaluating our software. If the partnership went through, we would expand into several new markets, nearly double our annual revenue, and establish ourselves as one of the fastest growing logistics technology companies in the Midwest. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. By Friday afternoon, my entire leadership team was focused on nothing else. "We're ready," my CFO, Natalie Green, said as she closed another financial report. "Their analysts have gone through every number. They know we're profitable. At this point, they're evaluating us as much as we're evaluating them." She was right. People often assume business partnerships are only about numbers. They're not. Culture matters just as much. You can recover from a slow quarter. Recovering from the wrong people is much harder. That afternoon, our legal advisor, Michael Foster, called me after reviewing Westbridge's internal documentation. "Everything looks solid," he said. "Financially, they're in excellent shape. One thing caught my attention, though." "What is it?" "A few internal complaints involving one of their senior finance managers. Nothing serious enough to become public, but several employees mentioned arrogance, dismissive behavior, and creating an uncomfortable environment during meetings." I wrote it down. "Do we know who?" "They're sending several executives Monday. You'll probably meet him." I thanked him and ended the call without thinking much about it. After all, every large company has at least one difficult manager. I had no reason to believe this particular one would matter to me. That evening, my family group chat lit up with photos from the rehearsal dinner. Ryan stood in the center of every picture with Claire beside him. My parents smiled proudly. Claire's parents smiled proudly. The tables were decorated with white roses and gold candles. Everyone looked happy. No one mentioned that Ryan's sister wasn't there. No one asked why. I stared at one photo for a few seconds before locking my phone and sliding it into my desk drawer. For the first time in years, I realized something surprisingly freeing. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done. I had spent most of my life trying to earn approval that was never going to come. No promotion would have been enough. No amount of money would have changed the version of me my parents had already decided existed. Once I accepted that, everything became much simpler. Monday arrived faster than expected. I was already in my office before 7. By 8:30, the executive team had gathered to review our presentation one final time. Natalie walked through the financial projections. Ethan demonstrated the newest software updates. Maya reviewed implementation timelines. Everything looked exactly the way it should. At 9:42, my executive assistant, Julia, knocked gently on my office door. "The Westbridge delegation just arrived." I closed my laptop. "How many?" "5. She glanced at the visitor list in her hands. Their vice president, Claire Sullivan, their operations director, 2 analysts. She stopped reading, then looked back at me, and a senior finance manager named Ryan Mitchell. For a second, I thought I'd heard the wrong surname. Then I realized I hadn't. Julia noticed my expression immediately. "Is everything okay?" I let out a slow breath. "Ryan is my brother." Her eyebrows lifted. "The same brother you mentioned before?" I nodded. "The one who skipped your company launch because he said startups were a waste of time." "The very same." She hesitated. "I can ask Natalie to lead the meeting." For a brief moment, I actually considered it. Then I remembered standing in my parents' kitchen holding that unopened espresso machine while my father explained why I wasn't welcome at my own brother's celebration. "No," I said calmly. "This is my meeting." The conference room overlooked the downtown skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Our presentation was already displayed across the large screen. Water glasses had been arranged perfectly. Every folder sat exactly where Julia always placed them. As I approached the room, I could see the visitors through the glass wall. Claire Sullivan looked completely focused while reviewing notes. The operations director was speaking quietly with one of the analysts. Ryan, meanwhile, leaned back comfortably in his chair, laughing about something on his phone. He looked exactly as I remembered, confident, relaxed, certain the world worked in his favor. Julia opened the conference room door. The conversation inside immediately stopped. Ryan looked up. For nearly 2 seconds, he simply stared at me. Confusion crossed his face, then recognition. Finally, A smirk. Ava? He actually laughed. What are you doing here? Nobody answered. Ryan looked around the room before turning back toward me. Don't tell me Westbridge hired you. A few people exchanged confused glances. He continued before anyone else had the chance to speak. Actually, he said with another laugh, this makes more sense. You're interviewing here, aren't you? Claire Sullivan frowned. Ryan. What? You know her? He smiled proudly. Unfortunately. Then he looked toward the rest of my executive team. This is my younger sister. She used to have a decent corporate job before deciding she'd become the next tech billionaire. A few awkward chuckles escaped from one of the junior analysts before they quickly realized nobody else was laughing. Ryan leaned slightly across the conference table. So what position are you applying for? He looked me up and down before adding, reception, administrative assistant, they usually need someone at the front desk. The room became completely silent. Natalie slowly lowered the pen she'd been holding. Ethan stared at Ryan as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Julia looked at me, silently waiting to see what I would do. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked past Ryan without saying a single word. I reached the far end of the conference table, pulled back the leather chair positioned at the head of the room, sat down, then rotated the silver nameplate so it faced the visitors. Ava Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer. Ryan's smile disappeared. Claire Sullivan looked from the nameplate to me, then back to Ryan. She slowly closed the folder in front of her. Oh my God, she whispered. Ryan frowned. What? Claire looked directly at him. Her face had completely lost its color. Ryan, stop talking. The realization had finally begun to hit him. For several long seconds, Ryan simply stared at the silver nameplate, as though he expected it to disappear if he blinked enough times. The confidence that had carried him into the room only moments earlier vanished almost instantly, replaced by the kind of expression people wear when reality refuses to match the story they've been telling themselves for years. Around the table, nobody spoke. Even the junior analysts seemed too uncomfortable to move, and the silence became so heavy that the quiet hum of the projector suddenly felt unusually loud. Claire finally broke it. Ryan, she said carefully, never taking her eyes off me. Ava Mitchell isn't interviewing here. She founded Access Flow Technologies. She's the CEO we're meeting today. Ryan turned toward her so quickly that his chair squeaked against the polished floor. What are you talking about? Claire looked genuinely embarrassed. I assumed you knew. He laughed once, but this time it sounded forced. No, that's impossible. I folded my hands on the conference table before answering. Actually, it's not. He looked back at me, searching my face for some sign that this was all a joke. You own this company? I do. The entire company. My co-founders and I built it from the ground up. The room fell silent again. Ryan opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, my older brother didn't seem to know what to say. I decided not to make the moment any more uncomfortable than it already was. Why don't we continue with the meeting? I said calmly. We've all invested a lot of time preparing for today. Claire nodded almost immediately. Of course. Ryan didn't speak again. For the next hour and a half, we went through every section of the proposed partnership in detail. We discussed implementation schedules, projected growth, cybersecurity requirements, long-term support, and financial forecasting. Claire handled every question with impressive professionalism, and it quickly became obvious why she'd risen so quickly within Westbridge. She knew the business inside and out, admitted when she needed additional information instead of pretending to know everything, and treated every member of my leadership team with genuine respect. Ryan, on the other hand, barely participated. He spent most of the meeting quietly flipping through documents without really reading them, avoiding eye contact whenever anyone addressed the room. The contrast between his behavior before the meeting and his behavior afterward couldn't have been greater. The same man who had confidently joked that I was applying for a receptionist position now looked as though he wished the floor would open beneath his chair. Near the end of the presentation, I asked one final question. Our legal department mentioned that there had been several internal complaints regarding management culture. Before we finalize anything, I'd like to understand how Westbridge plans to address those concerns moving forward. Claire answered honestly. She explained that the company had recently begun reviewing leadership practices and admitted there had been situations where certain managers had failed to meet the standards the company expected. She didn't make excuses or try to minimize the issue. Instead, she outlined the steps already being taken to improve accountability and workplace culture. I appreciated that answer. Good companies don't pretend problems never exist. They solve them. When the meeting concluded, I stood and shook hands with everyone who had attended. Thank you all for making the trip, I said. We'll complete our internal review this week and send our final decision shortly. Everyone thanked us before slowly leaving the room. Everyone except Ryan. He remained standing near the door until the others had walked into the hallway. Finally, he looked at me. I didn't know. His voice sounded completely different from the one I'd heard only an hour earlier. I know, I replied. If I'd known. I stopped him before he could finish. That's exactly the problem, Ryan. He frowned. You only think you owe me respect because you found out I was successful. 3 days ago, when you believed I was still the sister whose career had gone nowhere, humiliating me in front of strangers didn't bother you at all. The only thing that changed today was the amount of information you had about my life." He lowered his eyes. I continued speaking calmly because I wasn't angry anymore. "I never wanted you to admire me. I just wanted you to treat me with the same basic respect you would offer anyone else." For several seconds he said nothing. Then he quietly apologized. It sounded sincere, but sincerity doesn't erase years of behavior. He left without another word. 2 days later, our executive team completed its review. Financially, Westbridge was an excellent partner. Operationally, they were exactly what we needed. However, after discussing everything that had happened, we unanimously agreed on one condition before signing the agreement. Ryan Mitchell would have no involvement whatsoever with the Axis Flow account. The decision wasn't based on family history. It was based entirely on his conduct during a professional meeting, and the internal complaints our legal team had already uncovered. I documented every reason in writing because I wanted the decision to stand on facts rather than emotion. Claire called me the following afternoon. "I understand your position," she said. "Ryan has already been reassigned to another department, and someone else will manage your account from now on." She paused before continuing. "I also wanted to apologize personally. What happened during the meeting was unacceptable." "You don't owe me an apology," I answered. "You handled the situation professionally. 3 months later, our partnership had become one of the most successful projects in company history. Revenue increased beyond our original projections, our client base expanded into 2 additional states, and we hired another 27 employees to keep up with demand. One Friday evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in my office overlooking the city lights. My phone buzzed with another message from my parents asking if we could finally put the past behind us. I read it once before locking the screen. For years I believed success would eventually convince my family that I'd been worth believing in all along. Instead, I learned something much more valuable. The people who truly love you don't suddenly respect you after seeing your bank account, your job title, or your accomplishments. They believe in you long before the results become visible. That realization gave me something I'd spent most of my life chasing. Not revenge, not validation, peace. As I switched off the lights in my office and stepped into the hallway, I realized I no longer needed my family's approval to measure my own worth. The company we had built, the people who believed in our vision, and the life I had created through years of persistence were proof enough that I had made the right choice. The biggest victory isn't proving your critics wrong, it is reaching a point where their opinion no longer has the power to define who you are.